And welcome back to another edition of the Konsume podcast for News Junkies by News Junkies. My name's Lance Ranker. I am your host, and I am joined by Rick Ranker. How's it going, man?
Going pretty well.
There was a big decision, although it turns out to be pretty contradictory of another landmark decision in the court systems today. The 11th Circuit Court pretty much flip-flopped on unwarranted wiretappings. There's a lot of confusion in the court system, it seems, because it overturns a previous decision, I believe, by the same court the previous year, and then, I believe it was the Second Circuit Court, basically shut down a key provision of the Patriot Act. And so you've got these conflicting court decisions here recently. What's going on?
So, earlier this week, the Second Court of Appeals said that essentially you do not need a warrant in order to collect data about the location of your cell phone, who you have sent and received text messages from, where your phone calls are incoming and outgoing to. And that came on the heels of the Second Court of Appeals also saying that that was protected by the Fourth Amendment. And now today, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has said that the Patriot Act's provision for surveillance does not extend to the NSA's metadata collection program. So basically, you have a lot of different decisions that are stemming from different legal angles, all essentially contradicting one another when it comes to the place of privacy for average citizens and what the government can and cannot collect across various apparatuses of surveillance and investigation, whether it be the security apparatus with the NSA or the FBI in cahoots with local law enforcement collecting data from cell phones.
So is it time for us all to go rush and get ourselves a black phone or some other encryption app for our smartphone devices?
See, I like the idea of the black phone, especially the tech gadget junkie in me really loves the idea of that. The problem is you need to be speaking with somebody else who also possesses encryption technology on their end.
And that's pretty much the case with any encryption application, even on smart devices.
Absolutely. So short of you having friends that have privacy encryption of some sort connected to their end, unless it's two-way, all of that data is going to go basically clear text to the cell phone towers, to the data providers, and then they can be compelled without a warrant to hand that data over, bypassing, as it stands right now anyway, your Fourth Amendment rights.
Right. I know one application you and I have tested out just to kind of see how it worked is Redphone. It's for Android devices. I believe it's also for iOS devices as well. It's actually worked fairly well. It's kind of got like a secret handshake and not going, and so it connects, and also it will automatically detect if a person in your contact list you're trying to contact actually has that application installed, and will ask if you want to secure it with the application, which I think is pretty nifty because it's sort of an automatic check there.
Well, I like it just because you don't have to buy a specific phone for it, and so it's a way to connect peer-to-peer without really having to have hardware involved. Mm-hmm. But I think that the black phone that's for the Android device, it's sold. It's actually a physical phone you can purchase. Has a lot of privacy options that can at least help bypass the amount of data that you're spilling into the network. But I think that's really more of a niche thing. I don't see that gaining mass broad appeal. I think if the last 5 years have taught us anything in terms of the way we interact with technology, it's that people are really basically not worried about their individual privacy. They're worried about it as a larger umbrella issue.
Right.
But for them specifically, you don't really see that many people taking real measured steps to reel in what they're leaking, whether it's something as simple as anybody connected to Wi-Fi. I mean, unless you're over an HTTPS connection, a bored person with a program installed on their Windows computer can go ahead and see pretty much all the data you're pulling in and sucking out.
Well, yeah, exactly, and also piggyback off of that connection to do whatever. How many homes have been wrongfully raided by the FBI, all hardcore style, because, hey, we track some illicit, streaming activity to your home IP address. It could be a dude basically right next door doing it, and you never know. There have also been cases in the law and the court system to where a family had to go through all kinds of hell to clear their names from child pornography charges because it was their next door neighbor using their unsecure Wi-Fi connection to download it all or access it.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the broad swath of surveillance that's happening at all levels of state and federal governments. That, you know, investigations are ongoing where if certain data packets known to be illicit in some nature, it could be flagged at the ISP level and kicked off to a federal agency like the FBI. It could be part of a sweeping data collection process where they reel people in. And so privacy is a real issue, and I'm glad the courts are tackling it. There's been, 2 this week alone that have been pretty landmark that seem to be paving the way for a Supreme Court decision to intervene and really sort the matter out once and for all.
Right. It'll be interesting to see how that actually goes because, it makes you curious. It almost seems like this is destined for the Supreme Court. And really what's at stake here is the Patriot Act in general. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I'd say it's parts of the Patriot Act that a lot of citizens are most concerned about. Particularly, it's the data collection. Data collection, like I said before, people have a vested interest in. They tend to ignore their own personal instances of sending and receiving data, but I feel that a large portion of Americans do have a stake in that and do care, at least at a cursory level. So yeah, this thing is definitely going to the Supreme Court. Anytime you have the different circuits contradicting each other, or in this case, in the Second Circuit's case, contradicting itself, you're almost guaranteed to have a Supreme Court review.
Right. It would be it'd be interesting to see where this goes. How long do you think till we actually get that showdown?
Oh man, that could take a year and a half. These things are very slow moving, so I don't know enough about the inner workings of the Supreme Court and when their seasons are to pick cases up and take them on, but I would expect this in the next year and a half.
Okay, and it'll be something that hopefully a lot of the major news networks are covering. If not, I know we will be, just because that's sort of our thing. But I guess let's move on to the House Bill 2165 in Texas. It's this Texas legislator basically instead, his representative said that, all right, God created marijuana, and I don't believe God made a mistake that Texas politicians need to correct. I always thought this was pretty interesting because, there had been some grumblings within the Texas House legislature over the last year just in terms of medicinal marijuana, okay? Actually legalizing that, but also making sure it was only used for specific chronic conditions, the cancers, chronic pain, which is actually verified by a doctor, like a real doctor, not somebody you go get a physical from, you cough, and they give you your card. So it's that's been talked about, never really got anywhere. So now all of a sudden, this passes the House committee, all right? And basically what that means is that it's just step one. So
right, that's the equivalent of Congress having something in a committee and releasing it from committee as a draft form to go to the larger body of Congress.
Right, exactly. So Republican State Representative David Simpson, who's actually a big Tea Party stalwart, basically championed what he calls the quote-unquote Christian case for legalization. Now, his bill did just sort of sit around in the void for a few weeks before the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee took it up. Three Democrats and 2 Republicans actually voted to support it on Wednesday, which is yesterday. We're recording this Thursday evening, and so it did pass 5-2. Now, that actually does make the bill, and Texas House politics and rules, it actually makes the bill eligible for consideration to reach the House floor before the legislative session ends June 1st. Now, that's still very, very unlikely, but the fact that they've actually at least opened it up for that to happen. Do you think this kind of signals a shift in Texans' tolerance of marijuana?
Yeah, I think we've been seeing that nationwide. You look at the number of states that have gone not just from the decriminalization of marijuana, but to the access to it for patients in the form of dispensaries, to Colorado and Washington just outright saying, go for it. You don't need medical marijuana, some sort of note from a doctor. Just smoke it. We're not prosecuting it. Do what you will. And I think that culture is perpetuating a little more as we see, Denver's, as we see Seattle's, as we see, California and a lot of other states for that matter, implementing it in nothing's really happening. You're not seeing riots in the streets. You're not seeing crime spike. You're not seeing a lot of things that some of the naysayers said they would. And as a result, Texas tends to be a pretty live and let live kind of state in its own special way. And I think that marijuana is something that, frankly, most adults at some point in their life have tried once. They realize that it's not going to make you go crazy and start killing people. So, yeah, I do think that this is the dawn of a more relaxed atmosphere when it comes to something as benign as marijuana.
Well, what's interesting is that police chiefs across the country, they've been interviewed about this, spoken this on CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, Al Jazeera, time after time over the last few years. And the majority of them say that if they had to choose between the legalization of marijuana or alcohol, they would actually rather have marijuana legal as opposed to alcohol. Because they state in their experience that people tend to drive a bit more cautiously if they're stoned. Whereas on alcohol, it's who knows what the hell could happen. You've got people who are a bit more, I guess, relaxed while they're out on the roads or just out and about or even at home. They also say people who smoke are less prone to violent outbursts when dealing with police or other people. And so even if, say, some dude is stoned on his couch watching Cartoon Network or Adult Swim or whatnot, and his girlfriend or wife is giving him a hard time, he's less likely to pop up and smack her in the mouth with a gun, as opposed to somebody on alcohol. Obviously, that's a stretch. I'm wildly exaggerating here just to drive a point home. But the point is...
Is there a national rash of people being smacked in the face with guns?
I don't know. Ask Greg Hardy. But my point is this. When you have police officials, chiefs, and congressmen actually all saying, all right, research shows that people are less prone to violence and are also a bit more cautious when they're out in public, when they're high on marijuana or under its effects, there's a very serious possibility that, hey, maybe this is actually better overall than alcohol, which has been legal for how long now? And so would it not make sense to just simply sell and tax marijuana just like you do alcohol and tobacco?
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes perfect sense. I think the larger question is what does the governor do when that bill crosses his desk? There's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure from more conservative interests to not allow this. I think that a lot of people would see that as a sign of liberal progressiveness sort of taking over their state. I really do feel that a lot of conservative communities take issue with that because it really is. Marijuana ever since the 60s has been a very divisive sort of brand, if you will.
Well, that's because it was associated with the counterculture, the hippies, those lazy hippies who weren't doing anything to contribute to society.
And that's why we have the war on drugs, is because guys like Richard Nixon were afraid of people like the Haight-Ashbury kids who were, dropping acid, who were smoking weed, and they were the particular voices of dissent of the era, and that was perpetuated by Ronald Reagan. It was, up until the first Bush administration, and then, that sort of died out and stopped being the focus. But I think it really is more of a red state, blue state issue for the most part.
Well, I was actually going to ask you. I mean, do you think do you think the federal government should say, you know what, we're going to lax our policies when it comes to marijuana, we'll reclassify it so it's not classified as bad as heroin? Is it one of these things where, just leave it up to the states?
I think ultimately you have to leave it up to the states. I mean,
they're the ones that have to come up with the policies and procedures to deal with it, right?
And they're the ones that they have to deal with the issues that are going to arise, real or imagined, when it comes to, incarceration versus rehabilitation, when it comes to reaping the benefits of tax income, when it comes to how does that impact their environment. And by their environment, I mean if you are Arizona, if you're Texas, if you're New Mexico, if California, there's very real implications for that when it comes to having illicit cannabis coming from cartels in Mexico. Right. So I think that each state has a different set of issues and challenges that they need to deal with. And so removing the federal ban at that level would at the very least allow people to make an informed decision, have a healthy debate, and decide what's right for them. And I think we're slowly moving in that direction.
Well, and the other point I want to make here before we get back on to what would a Texas governor do, and also whether there's going to be enough votes for it in the next few years. But is this, here over the last 6 to 8 months, a lot of entrepreneurs in Texas have actually left the state to go start cannabis-type businesses in states where it's legal for them to do so. Whether they want to cultivate it or they want to open up shops, they're leaving the state of Texas to go pursue that entrepreneurial type idea that they have because they can do it legally there and actually make, get in on the ground floor essentially of this new industry. And not so much new in the sense that, it's never been around, but new in the sense that you can actually do it legally in these specific states. And so the state of Texas, which is very pro-business and whatnot, they want to have an environment where people want to do their businesses here because they don't want to miss out on that tax. So how much do you think that would sway any state, really?
I don't know that the pro-business aspect would sway the states, especially Texas, just because I'm not convinced that Texas has an ideal environment for growing marijuana, though truthfully, I don't know what that looks like. I guess
you're not a cannabis farmer?
I'm not. Not this week, anyway.
Not this week. All right.
But no, I do think that, that plays a small part of it, but I think the larger issue at hand is the tax revenue from the consumer side of the sales. Because you can import it and resell it, but still classify that as a state tax.
And also where you could actually put those tax dollars you collect, like Colorado's put in their education system. Texas actually has about a $1.5 to $3 billion shortfall in education funding over the next 10 years or so, and they have no idea what they're going to do to make up that gap. So, maybe it's something to sort of lighten that load almost on the public school system here. Who knows? So, I guess let's get back on, the governor, because it would be the governor that would have to choose whether he or she wanted to veto this or not, if it ever made it to his or her desk. Right now, Texas Governor is Greg Abbott, who's too busy basically claiming that President Barack Obama and socialists and communists everywhere are trying to take over the entire southwestern part of the United States, including Texas, and probably give it back to Mexico, deploying the National Guard for the Jade Hell military drills. I'm not sure if he would be the one to sign it into law. I have no read on this guy. We kind of know the type of people he's pandering to. But in your opinion, do you think it would take a Democratic governor to not veto this?
It depends. I don't know what special interests are at play, and that's really, at the end of the day, whenever you have a hot button issue like that, who you have to watch. Because if you have a lot of special interest dollars coming into a state, that's always going to sway a lot of political leanings. Take, for example, Proposition 8 in California. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jesus, you're talking about passing an anti-gay piece of legislation on the West Coast. I mean, that's unheard of, but you get enough special interest dollars at play, and you can make that happen.
Right. It's definitely would be pretty interesting. I think it could eventually happen, but I guess the real question is, right, even if you got this new wave of support publicly, it means squat with the politicians more often than not. So let's just say, let's play this game. In the next 5 years, does Texas have the votes to make this work?
I think that's about the threshold. If it was going to happen, I'd say, probably 2020 would be about right, 2019, somewhere in there. But there's no way Texas is going to legalize marijuana with a veto in place. I think it has to happen without a veto. Right,
because then, of course, I don't know the specific rules, but I believe you'd have to have at least 2/3 of the Texas legislature to vote to overturn that veto, if you didn't have that power.
Yeah, that seems to be the standard at the federal and a lot of state levels. So that's that would be my guess, is that with a veto in place, it doesn't happen.
Well, and it could take another 2 years or so for it to really truly make the rounds to where it's a bill that enough people in the legislature could get behind. And not to mention, you're also talking about another election cycle, so there could be some turnover there with people who do or don't support it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, let's face it, though, in Texas, a recent poll done over the last 2 years, I believe, said that 6 in 10 Texans actually support the legalization of marijuana.
Yeah, but that was with the inference of it being a Christian issue, which makes me wonder if that was a push poll or not.
Yeah, that is true. Fair point there. So but even nationwide, not just in states that have already legalized it, the interest in it is rising, for one, as well as the positive opinions and those negative feelings are going away. So nationwide, people are just like, I don't care. Let's just go ahead and get this over with.
Attitudes are changing on a lot of things, and I think the 2010s, or this decade is really going to be looked at is probably a very boring decade. Not a lot culturally happening in terms of music or in art or in any sort of cultural thing that we last saw, I guess, in the 90s. But I think what you are seeing is a lot of progress happening on domestic issues and people relaxing and not freaking out about who's gay or who isn't, people being told to kind of shut the fuck up if they have opinions or issues with race, marijuana, everybody's kind of taking a breath and just relaxing a little bit. So I see a lot of progress over the last 5-10 years, and I see that trend kind of continuing.
Yeah, no, likewise. So let's move into something where there's another trend continuing. Deflategate. Tom Brady. New England Patriots. It's not even so much sports in general, it's just sort of the ethics of sports, the ethics of sportsmanship and competition. So let's start with Brady and what he did or didn't know. He claims that he didn't know squat about deflated balls this or deflated balls that. Turns out in the Wells report, that was an independent investigation done by Ted Wells into this. I mean, it's a 240-plus page document. You can find it online. It was released Wednesday afternoon. But basically the conclusions are that it's more probable than not that Patriots personnel tried to break the rules and that Tom Brady was likely aware of the practice of deflating balls. I mean, it makes it seem like, okay, it's something that's just been ongoing and they've been getting away with it. There are even text messages that were actually captured through the investigation where it talks about, two men who actually worked in the Patriots locker room attendant Jim McNally and Patriots equipment assistant John Drsminski exchanging texts where they're setting up for McNally to deflate these balls for Tom Brady to his specifications. And McNally and Brady also had an hour-long conversation after text messages between those two were sort of found, vaguely talking about something, okay, which would be him deflating the balls for Brady. Now,
well, they talked for a cumulative total of an hour over the span of, I believe, 5 or 6 different phone calls.
Right.
So it wasn't like they had like a long fireside chat or anything.
Right, but that last phone call, they said, lasted nearly 30 minutes.
Okay.
Right.
Well, either way, these guys didn't talk in a year or two. And then all of a sudden, after the investigation kicks off, they had a number of phone calls.
Even though Tom Brady claimed that he didn't know who this guy was, he's never spoken to him before, he doesn't know what role he fills in the locker room either, which turned out to be false. Now, of course, Brady had, a statement at an appearance he was at some benefit or whatnot, and just very smugly said, "No, don't know what you're talking about, ha ha ha." And then, of course, his initial comments after it first came up was, "I've never participated in anything like that. I would never do something like that. Ha ha." It's just coming across very smug. Now, Tom Brady has sort of lived this life now to where he's kind of, the man every woman wants to be with, the man every man wants to be, apparently. So I guess he's really used to getting his way, always winning, and never getting caught up in the mix of all the cheating scandals or accusations that have surrounded the Patriots for the better part of their dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, this has been all over CNN today. I know that this was going on before the Super Bowl, and at today's press conference, he came out and he was asked how he felt about, the finding and, did that take away from the Super Bowl win? And of course, he's really just shrugging things off, saying absolutely not. And I find 2 things out of the story kind of interesting. Number one is he really just has a laissez-faire attitude about the whole thing, or at the very least in public. He's just sort of shrugging it off, doesn't appear to really being able to care less. And when being asked, during today's event that I guess was pre-scheduled, it wasn't meant to be a press conference, for his response to the findings, had a very just sort of blasé, devil-may-care attitude, kind of laughing it off and not really answering any question with any sort of sincerity. They were sort of smart-ass, off-the-cuff answers. And I find that very telling for a guy who's facing as much media scrutiny as he is. But I find the other part of that interesting, that we care this much over literally, what is it, a few tenths of an ounce of inflation of the football?
Right, but it does have an impact on the ability to grip the football. And 538 actually did a study over the last year or so, actually talking about the historical significance of the Patriots never fumbling the ball. Okay, there's a very clear benefit to never turning the ball over. Basically, if you don't fumble the ball, then the other team doesn't get an extra possession, and also you don't. Typically, turnovers do lead to points. All right, because that's just the way history has shown. However, 538 proved that for whatever reason, they didn't have a reason at the time when they did this report, but they said statistically speaking, it's practically impossible for the Patriots to have been this historically good at not turning the ball over via fumble. And so now all of a sudden they did some commentary in the Wells report earlier today and basically said, like, holy crap, like, even though we haven't studied this yet, it seems like we now have the reason why they've turned the ball over so little by fumbling on the ground over, the last decade or so. Just historically good. We're talking record books good, where statistically speaking, it should not happen, but it is consistently for them and them only. And so they're going to do some studying on the impact, a lower pressured ball has on that, but it's common knowledge that it is easy to grip a deflated ball.
Okay, well, let me play devil's advocate here. Isn't it conceivable then that if the Patriots are playing with a certain type of ball, that then the opposing team would have all the same advantages as the Patriots have?
No, because each team plays with their own balls.
So depending on who has possession, they play with their own team ball?
Correct, because the NFL rules basically state that a ball has to be a certain PSI within a certain range. And so it's up to the team, which is usually left to the quarterback, to decide what PSI level they're comfortable with gripping and throwing.
I see.
Right.
So it's really not even an issue then of the other team had the same advantages that the Patriots had.
Exactly, because if that were the case, and whatever, be blown off. But no, it's not. And apparently the Patriots have a history of that. I mean, if you just look at the Patriots' history of alleged cheating or proven cheating, I mean, this dates back to even before their first Super Bowl win or leading up to it. All right, back in 2002, Marshall Faulk claimed the Patriots cheated the Rams out of the Super Bowl win. Now, that was Tom Brady's first championship, the Patriots, Super Bowl 36 or whatever it was. Marshall Faulk, Hall of Famer, he was actually the very first person ever to call out Bill Belichick for having a little too much information ahead of the game. And we know later, I think it was 2006, 2007, Spygate. Okay? But basically what Marshall Faulk said, as well as Mike Martz, who's the Rams head coach at the time, and Kurt Warner, we all know who he is, that basically stated that they actually had some plays that they had never even run yet, but, they had practiced, never ran in the game because they were saving them, okay? And things that just basically walked through ahead of time. And basically what Marshall Faulk said was that, look, it's either the absolute best coaching in the world when you come up with situations that you'd never seen before, or they'd actually seen them practice or walk through them before and knew exactly what was coming when it was coming. So that's the first one. 2004, Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker James Harrison called out the Patriots for stealing signals, which was actually later proven by NFL investigators. Okay, so they just kind of got a slap on the wrist, basically. But basically, James Harrison said, we should have another Super Bowl ring. We were the best football team in 2004, but the Patriots, who we beat during the regular season, stole our signals and picked up 90% of our blitzes in the AFC title game. And then they did get busted for it later, but again, slap on the wrist, a little bit of a fine. No victories had to be given back, obviously not the Super Bowl win either. And then, of course, Spygate in 2007. So there were multiple accusations of spying on teams, and then all of a sudden this became reality with proof in 2007 when the league finally disciplined the Patriots for recording the Jets' practices, although they were alleged to have recorded other teams as well. You're talking defensive signals, formations, as well as personnel strategies were stolen, and the Patriots were stripped of a first-round pick and fined $250,000, which is basically chump change to an NFL team. Okay, now Bill Belichick was fined $500,000, but the team was still able to basically get their shot to play in the Super Bowl. And so that was actually their perfect season. Well, it wasn't perfect regular season. And the Giants lucked into like a crazy catch and won the Super Bowl that year. And then, of course, this year, 2015, all over again, using illegal plays against Baltimore in the divisional playoff game, which technically weren't against the rules, but they were still considered illegal plays. So the NFL corrected that after the fact and made them officially against the rules. Okay, and then the deflated balls during the AFC Championship game against the Colts, as well as other games during the regular season leading up to playoffs and all. So it's, and reports are this. Basically, officials have been told that if the league confirms deflated footballs, it will likely result in a lost draft pick or draft picks. But also there have been rumblings that Tom Brady could face up to a 1-year suspension, although I don't buy that because he's the NFL's golden boy. With their history, I mean, do you think this tarnishes the legacy of Tom Brady as well as the reputation of the Patriots in general?
I don't know, because the way I look at it, and again, I'm not the biggest sports fan, but the way I see NFL culture and sports culture as a whole, to be frank, is that this is a win at all costs, no matter what.
Right.
You win or you lose. If you lose, I don't care the reason you lost, you're a loser. And so when you have that type of environment, I can see that motivates people to say, okay, well, if if this is the game we're playing, let's win at all costs. And if we have to tiptoe into some gray area and sidestep or skirt some rules here on a technicality, so be it. It's almost like, well, what did you expect? You created this sort of environment where anything goes, win at all costs. Nobody cares about coming in second. You're either a winner or a loser. And if that's the sort of culture that you thrive in, if that's the sort of atmosphere that your fans demand and expect, then what did you think was going to happen? It's almost like this was inevitable at some point, particularly coming from a team who, lives or dies on their successes. A franchise like the Patriots, a guy like Belichick, quarterback like Brady. This is sort of how they got there, is by, winning at all costs.
Well, let me ask you this then, because I don't know. I guess I wonder, why do we care so much? It's pretty comical, and we've discussed this before, even on previous shows, about how our society wants to prop up these athletes, but the intellectuals of the world who are actually doing things to try to save our own planet, for example, are just like, poo-poo on you. Where's my athlete at? I want to use him as a role model for my child, even though he may have just been arrested for busting up his girlfriend. Why do we care so much that either, Brady and the Patriots cheated, or, why do we just not care that they did, and hey, whatever. I mean, they're not the only ones trying to game the system, right?
Well, no. I mean, there's a handful of billionaires and no shortage of special interests that are all doing the exact same thing inside the Beltway right now.
Exactly.
But nobody cares about that because we're too busy working our 2 minimum wage working jobs to just try to keep the lights on, and the only salvation a lot of people get is on Sundays or are on game nights, where they're able to kick back and be entertained watching people do feats of athleticism that the average person will never be able to do, and that kind of becomes a lot of people's universes, unfortunately. And that's just kind of our culture. We're a beer drinking, let's not think too much, let's watch sports, and check out so that we can just survive the next day of grueling, bullshit, meaningless, hard work just to scrape by. So, I mean, if we're asking, why do we care? I think it's a lot of Americans care because that's really, and perhaps sadly, one of the most interesting things going on in their life as a person, individually.
You make some great points there, and I don't disagree with any of them, because it's a great escape, like going to the movies or reading a good book. It helps you sort of escape from your everyday reality, which is oftentimes, you're either working your 2 part-time minimum wage paying jobs to simply put food on the table for your children, your family, or just simply to pay the bills, which oftentimes isn't even enough, or you're working your one job, which maybe pays you barely above poverty level, to keep you afloat there. And so, it's pretty tough. So, your one release are sporting events, and look at these athletes who are millionaires and drive the fast cars and basically live the life that you wish you probably did.
Yeah, it's a way to live vicariously, I think. And so whenever you live vicariously through something or someone else, anything that affects them, you get the perception that it affects you. So people get all riled up, and we end up talking about things like Deflategate and the Patriots.
Yeah, deflated balls. Go figure. All right, well, that's going to do it for us tonight. Looking forward to next week's show. We've got a lot going on next week, so we'll get to that. We have some things, obviously, on the site, so check us out at Konsume.com. That's Konsume with a K. You can also hit us up on social media at Facebook at KonsumeHQ and Twitter at KonsumeHQ as well. I'm Lance Raker. That's Rick Raker. Thank you very much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes. Have a great night.